I was very fortunate because as a child, I was exposed to something, the entertainment business, and taught about it in a really solid way. My dad is a very good teacher, kind of a natural teacher, and he really gave me the fundamentals. A lot of children are put in that situation, and they're just a little bit more than kind of trained animals. I mean, they're just they look cute, and then people want to get a certain reaction out of them, and they goad them or they bribe them or however they do it, but the children aren't really learning how to act. So I had that going for me. The environment, particularly on the Andy Griffith Show, was really wonderful and very inclusive. And if there's any reason that I like reaching out and talking to people about what I do, it's because that was very much the environment on the Andy Griffith Show. The actors were really allowed to participate, to contribute. And even as a kid, I'm talking about 6, 7, 8 years old, I was allowed to raise my hand and offer up a point of view about a scene or changing a line of dialogue or making something a little bit more natural. I was allowed to participate. And, you know, imagine the sort of the self-esteem that goes along with being accepted by a bunch of adults. It was extraordinary. I became intrigued by what the director did, primarily because when I was working on the show, on the Andy Griffith Show, the actors were a blast. I had so much fun hanging around with them. They were interesting, they were smart, they were funny, they were playing practical jokes. Then on a dime, they could focus and do great work. And it was, you know, even as a kid, I was impressed with these people. But I also really enjoyed spending time with the crew. You know, they'd let me sit up there and work the camera or learn a little something about sound, how the microphone worked, and placement and lighting and things like that. And I enjoyed that time. And after a while, I realized that the director was the one person who, moment to moment, day in and day out, really got to play with everybody. And the job just started to look very, very good to me. The thing that I've also, I think, understood is because my father is sort of a freelance actor, a character actor. He's never become a star. He's never had leverage, never had power in the industry. But he's always worked and he's made his living. But it's always a struggle. It's always a struggle. I was always extremely fortunate. But I could see my father struggling in what I view as in a kind of a noble way, because he's not really getting, you know, all the kudos and the perks and all the stuff that a lot of people are attracted to the business for. He just liked being a part of it. He liked being a part of it. And that's what I began to understand, is that I was a part of something. And I started to think about what that thing was. What is that process of staging a television show or a movie and communicating with the audience? And it began to be much more to me than just showing up and fulfilling a function because somebody handed me a script. It became an exploration. It became a chance to really to keep challenging myself and keep kind of trying to sort of honor this process, this system. Every project is, you know, kind of a potential disaster, and people are afraid. Each project requires a huge investment. So, as a young person, a young adult, trying to make the transition from sitcom actor to motion picture director, well, I mean, I was getting an awful lot of sort of, you know, patronizing kind of pats on the head and, hey, hang in there, and, you know, in another 10 or 15 years, I'm sure somebody will give you a chance to direct. And that's not what I wanted to hear at all. So I had a lot of frustration about that, and I kind of earned my way out by making student films myself, by writing, and by being fortunate enough to get myself into a position of some leverage. By being one of the lead actors on Happy Days, I had some leverage. It's had something I could sort of trade with. Most people get their first chance to direct by blackmailing their way in. Generally, they have to say, well, if you want me to write the script, you got to let me direct it. If you want me to act in the movie, you got to let me direct it. If you want this money, this group of investors that I've found, you're going to have to let me direct the film. And that's, nobody really wants to hand a first-time director the reins. When I began directing, I was very young, and if there was an area where I had some expertise, it was in light comedy. And this is something that I'd been acting in, a tone I'd been involved with for 20 years already. And so it was easier for me to convince people that I could actually take the responsibility and do the job of directing a film, working in that tone. So I did, my first movie was a car chase comedy, young people on the run, called Grand Theft Auto, and made for $602,000, but the film made a terrific profit, and it got me started. I wrote it with my father, and I had to star in it in order to get to direct it. But that's the last time that I acted in anything that I directed. Well, I actually had to do a scene in the next film that I directed, but I didn't like it, and I cut the scene out. And the executives in charge of the project, fortunately, liked the movie well enough that they accepted the fact that I cut myself out of the movie. That was the last time that I acted in anything that I've directed. And since then, I graduated onto more and more ambitious projects, gained the industry's trust, gained the trust of potential creative collaborators, great actors, writers, other producers, and slowly but surely tried to broaden the range and scope of what I could do as a director. Initially, when the idea for Apollo 13 came to me, I didn't remember the mission very well. And then as I looked at the facts, I had a vague recollection of it. I always believed in the space program, in the spirit of exploration, but I was not a space junkie. Initially, I thought, wow, this would be a great challenge to try to create for the audience, recreate the experience of going into space. And it's a very dramatic story, and that would be interesting. But I was looking at it more as a sort of cinematic exercise, a great learning experience. However, as I began to learn more about the mission, I began to see that it was in fact even more dramatic than I realized. And more importantly, as I began to meet the individuals involved, not only the astronauts, but also a number of the mission control people who were involved in the rescue, I began to see that this was really a great story of human triumph, a very emotional story, and that you could be very, very truthful, and yet it was a real opportunity to sort of celebrate what human beings are capable of. And so my whole point of view about the movie shifted about, very early in the process, but it was a dramatic shift. Well, I had just a kind of a so-so formal education, and I was, by no means a natural student. I was in trouble in the classroom. I'd spend about half the year, maybe a little more than half the year, being tutored on the set, where I was generally the only kid. If we had other kids in the episode, they'd be tutored for that week. But my teacher for 8 years in my own little one-room schoolhouse was Catherine Barton, and a great woman who passed away many years ago, but meant a lot to me. And she had a great love of literature and reading. And I can't say that I, really took to it right away. But every so often, to this day, I'm 43 years old, I'll recall, something that Mrs. Barton said, an attitude that she had about something, about poetry or stories. So it was a pretty creative environment for me there at the Andy Griffith Show. And also at home, my father was always writing or conducting an improvisational workshop or something in the house. So I was around it all the time. When I would go back to school, it would be a major adjustment because suddenly I was in a classroom, and I didn't and don't process things very quickly. If there was a dictation exercise where the teacher's writing something on the board and we're supposed to copy it down, I'd always be the last one to finish. It wouldn't be terrible, it wouldn't be wrong, I'd just be last. And very nerve-wracking to be sitting here, you know. Now, if on top of that, you're sort of the new kid, and you're not necessarily getting things quite as quickly as everybody else, it was a little nerve-wracking. The kids tended to, I wouldn't say ostracize me, but to make me uneasy, because there'd always be 2 or 3 weeks where every day at school was more like some kind of a personal appearance, where I was at everybody's disposal, and if one group wanted to get autographs, they'd bug me for autographs. If another group wanted to, make fun of me, they'd make fun of me. And I wasn't a person. I was this sort of kid, this image from TV that they now had at their disposal. It was kind of strange. Frank Capra's autobiography, The Name Above the Title, was very inspirational for me, and it's a fun book. How absolutely true it is, I don't know, but it's very inspiring, and it also offers a lot of insight into the kind of process of directing movies, the creative, undertakings, interactions with powerful, creative people, stars and studio executives, and it's really a great book. It was a very important book for me. For writing, there's a book by an author named Linda Seeger, and the book is called How to Make a Good Script Great, and it's about rewriting. But it's very useful to anybody who's thinking of sitting down and trying to write a screenplay, because it doesn't present a sort of rigid formula or structure, but it gives you lots of lists, and it almost provides you with like a checklist, so that when you're inspired and you come up with your idea, you can then sort of ask some of the questions that Linda Seeger asks and challenge your story in that way, and it can be really valuable. There are a lot of factors and elements that come into play when you're putting a movie together, and you always have this sort of power of saying, well, I choose not to participate in this project if it really has to go in this direction, but generally it doesn't come to that. What I find really exciting about working on a creative project is being at the center of this really intense collaboration, and it's always fascinating. And whenever you face a problem, it's kind of upsetting, kind of daunting. Everybody's got a suggestion, a point of view. There's a little arguing that goes on, a little friction, and all of a sudden somebody, myself or someone, will present a solution that makes sense. Generally, there's almost an instant consensus, but even if there isn't, if it just really rings a bell for me as the director, I get to say, that's it. That's what we'll do. And it's exciting. It's thrilling. Sometimes I even get, it sounds kind of corny, I get kind of this emotional rush that, we did it. We came up with a solution. And I find that really interesting. One of the little theories that I always have is that creative undertakings, putting on shows, working in groups on projects, school projects, research projects, making films or videotapes, I always think that they're, in a way, a kind of better model for how to get things done in life than, for example, playing sports. And I used to play and coach kids, and I love sports. I love athletic endeavors. But the fact is that that's a kind of a split second, always boils down to split second reaction time and dedication, preparation, and then execution, split-second execution. And most human endeavors don't depend on that. They depend on a more methodical, careful consideration of all the possibilities, and then the dedication and the execution. And I always think that creative projects are actually a better training ground for getting things done in the real world, in real life. When you're doing something as emotionally risky as sort of working on a TV show or a movie, I mean, part of it is that you're facing the real possibility of complete public humiliation. I mean, it's not all that unusual for people to just say, "Oh, that was terrible. Did you see that guy? He was awful. He stinks." And so everybody knows that that's out there because they've participated in that same kind of ragging on shows and movies. They know that you're putting yourself up for that sort of that sort of judgment. You're opening yourself. So as a result, there does need to be a kind of trust. But I've found that in the creative community, there's often a sort of an instant trust, and you can either in just one or two conversations, you can actually determine whether that trust exists in a relationship or not. And but it's people are always looking around for allies in this business. And I mean, there are a few lone wolves out there, but I certainly am not one of them. My partner Brian Grazer and I have been basically working together since 1981. And off and on a little bit, but absolutely partnered since '85. And he's a producer, and I do some producing, but mostly directing. And we really rely upon each other because it often feels kind of emotionally dangerous in the business because you are always setting yourself up to fail. I mean, most shows and movies don't quite live up to expectations. There's a degree of disappointment that goes along with almost every project that you get involved with, and it's important to have to be working with people who you really trust. I often work with the same writers, not always, because I also feel that it's important not to fall into really strict patterns. I don't think you want to make this film exactly the way you made the last one, or this TV series exactly the way you made the last one. And so one way, for me to sort of mix that up, not fall into the trap of that kind of repetition, is to take on new collaborations. Sometimes it's a little emotionally risky, but it's usually a risk worth taking. I think I handle criticism well. I think that's one of my strengths, in fact. That doesn't mean I like being criticized. It hurts. It always hurts, whether it's a critic, whether it's a bad review, whether it's, people in the bathroom after they've seen the movie and I hear them and, a couple of people are saying, "Hey, I really liked it," and one person says, "it wasn't so good." I'll forget about all the compliments, and that one criticism will stay with me. And so I'm very, very sensitive to it. But I really believe that it's wrong to stick your head in the sand and pretend that everybody loves what you do and only listen to the good stuff because you need to be sort of nourished by that. I think the healthiest kind of balance is one where you have this self-confidence to continue to engage, to do the work, to prepare yourself so that you believe that you actually are bringing something to this process, that it's reasonable for you to be there doing this work, participating in this endeavor, whatever it is. But try not to let that drift into arrogance, blind arrogance. Instead, try to maintain the humility to then listen to those who do speak up and say, I think you're making a mistake. I don't think that's as good as it should be. And certainly, in any kind of endeavor, it gets back to old Abe Lincoln. You can please some of the people, all the time, but you can't please all the people. What is it? I got it all screwed up there. But how did it go? You can please all of the people some of the time, and some of the people all of the time. But you can't please all the people all the time. That still might be wrong, but you get the gist. It's clearly the case with any sort of creative undertaking. There's no way, no movie that's ever been made, no television show that's ever been produced that everybody liked. So you have to take that into account. I've had, I think, an extraordinarily kind of blessed journey. At the same time, if I can give myself credit for anything, it's probably for not taking it all for granted. I don't think I've ever assumed it was going to go on forever unless I kept earning my way, earning my keep, and maybe even to like a neurotic extent. I never want to coast on past performances, and it's probably one of the reasons why I wanted to become a director. So I wanted to be able to control those opportunities so I could keep doing good work. The thing that I learned about my father, and I continue to learn from him, and I think it's worth mentioning, is that he just returned a couple of years ago from his 50th high school reunion, and he was very gratified by the experience because all of his buddies were retired, the ones who were still alive. And my father is working more now than he ever has. And he said, a lot of my friends, they went into the corporate world, they became doctors, they had great careers, the kinds of careers that everyone would have sort of applauded them for pursuing. And they pursued them, and some of them are happy about it, and some of them aren't. But I followed my dream. And if the object is to have a secure and gratifying life, I've achieved that. Maybe never stardom, but my home is paid for. I have a great pension through the Screen Actors Guild plan, and I have security. And on top of everything else, while everyone else is winding down, I still can keep the dream alive, because you never know when another interesting challenge is going to come along or another great role. And I'm working more now than I ever have, and I'm active. And I've got a lot to look ahead toward. And it was really kind of moving and worth noting, because, in fact, you don't have to become a superstar for this to be a gratifying life and career choice. But you got to be ready to persevere and take a lot of rejection. A lot of people have been coming up to me and saying, I have a sense that I might like to be involved in entertainment or filmmaking, but I also could go to med school, or I could go to law school, or I could pursue, a more concrete, specific kind of academic discipline that leads to a career. What do I do? They keep saying. And what I keep telling them is that any sort of intellectual, academic pursuit is going to be valid to a creative life. So you almost can't go wrong. You almost can't go wrong pursuing the sort of the more obvious course. And anyone, particularly given sort of video cameras and word processors, anybody can experiment around with creativity, with writing, with putting together a film. And film schools are great. I encourage a lot of people to go. I went to film school. It can be wonderful if you know that's really what you want to dedicate yourself. But if there's any question at all, I would say, trust the fact that you can get your movies shown, you can enter them in festivals, you can be very, very creatively ambitious outside the framework of a film school, and you really can pursue both avenues. And why make a decision at this point if you don't have to? If you're not going to school in a sort of one of the hubs, New York, Chicago, L.A., you know, there are still outlets. There are still ways for your films to be seen. And I really believe that great creative ideas will sort of find their way to the surface. You know, make your videos, enter them in festivals, show them to your friends, expose them to criticism. Go out and make another film. Don't put all your creative eggs in one basket. Don't write one spec script and walk away. You know, just keep pushing it and pushing it. And you may find that it's too much trouble. Good lesson. Don't do it. Walk away. You might find that you really love it. If you really love it, you'll find ways to pursue it.